Well, come back to the channel back in the 1970s. You could haul a full cooler right into a stadium. Glass bottles clinked in the stands at baseball or football games, and nobody thought twice about it. Folks set up like it was their own picnic. Drinks on ice, sandwiches wrapped in foil, security barely looked, and the ushers just smiled. Playgrounds were built tough in those days. You had spinning witch's hat contraptions, kids flying off at dizzying speeds, and the ground below was plain concrete. No mulch, no soft rubber mats, just bruised knees and dead elbows. Parents sat on a bench smoking or chatting while the kids sorted themselves out, and somehow everyone survived, believe it or not. High schools actually had student smoking areas. They were official courtyards marked off by the school itself where teens could light up between classes. Teachers walked past, maybe giving a nod, but it was considered normal. The haze rolled across the quad and nobody called it a problem until later during the gas crisis. Odd-ven rationing dictated when you could fill up based on your license plate. Folks desperate for backup stashed gasoline in milk cans, glass jugs, even old coffee tins in the garage. The smell of fuel hung heavy in the air. But at the time, it was just part of coping. After the 55 miles per hour speed limit was set, CB radios became the voice of the highway. Families cruised the interstate while Dad chatted on the mic, calling out smoky reports about police ahead. Handles like Gear Jammer or Sugar Cookie filled the airwaves, turning long drives into a rolling community on wheels. Open liquor bottles in cars weren't unusual. People rode with a beer between their knees or a mixed drink in a plastic cup, and it wasn't seen as reckless. Strict open container enforcement came later. Back then, the idea of sipping while driving didn't raise alarms. It was just part of a Friday night cruise. Neighborhood block parties sometimes featured old pigs roasting in improvised oil drum smokers, streets filled with smoke, laughter, and kids darting between tables of potato salad and deviled eggs. No permits, no catering licenses, just community. It was noisy, messy, and heartfelt. Today, regulations and ordinances would shut it down before the charcoal even lit. Airline pilots lit cigarettes right in the cockpit mid-flight. Passengers barely noticed because the whole cabin was already thick with smoke from the rows behind. Ashtrays were built into every armrest, and the smell of burning tobacco was as much a part of flying as the sound of the engines humming outside. Neighborhood. Movie nights meant somebody renting a 16mm film, hanging a sheet on the garage, and telling folks to bring their own booze. Families dragged lawn chairs, set up coolers, and settled in under the stars. No permits, no licensing, just popcorn popping and kids running around while the rill clattered in the dark. Snow tires came with metal studs in those days, biting right into icy roads. They tore up pavement, leaving ruts and grooves. But for many states, it was perfectly legal. The crunch of studs on asphalt was part of winter's soundtrack. Even though it left the streets scarred by spring thaw, flying coach meant free drinks. Real drinks. Flight attendants wheeled carts up the aisle and poured gin, whiskey, or wine for anyone who asked. No ID checks, no fees. Travelers toasted at 30,000 feet as if it were a cocktail party. Air travel felt like a luxury. Even on the cheapest tickets, roller rinks were filled with smoke. Ashtrays lined the snack bar. Parents puffed on the bleachers. And even the DJ sometimes spun records with a cigarette dangling. The haze mixed with disco lights as kids skated laps. Nobody called it secondhand smoke. It was just the atmosphere of a Friday night out. Truck parades rolled through town, tossing candy straight into the street. Kids darted between wheels and bumpers without a second thought. Scrambling for gumdrops and Tootsie Rolls, parents clapped along, smiling at the sight. Safety officers today would sound alarms. But back then, it was just part of small-town fun and summer traditions. Cigarette companies openly sponsored booths at county fairs, hang out free swag, hats, matches, lighters, even sample packs. Families strolled by with kids in tow, and nobody blinked. Tobacco brands were everywhere on banners, racetrack walls, even fairground rides. It was advertising at its boldest, long before regulation and lawsuits pushed it out of sight. concerts. In the 70s meant festival seating. Fans surged to the front the moment gates opened. No assigned rows, no barricades, just a sea of bodies pressing toward the stage. It was chaotic, loud, and risky, but fans called it electric. Today, tight security and designated seating have turned those free-for-alls into history. City buses came equipped with ashtrays on the floor and flip-open ceiling vents. Drivers often smoked with one hand on the wheel, steering with the other, while passengers lit up behind them. The air grew thick with tobacco smoke, but no one complained. It was simply the atmosphere of public transit in that era. Backyard pools often had no fences, no alarms, and no self-closing gates. Kids from the neighborhood wandered in for a swim on hot afternoons. Sometimes with no adults in sight, it wasn't seen as a liability or danger, just summer fun. Today, it'd bring lawsuits, insurance nightmares, and safety inspectors in a heartbeat. Chlordane was the go-to treatment for termites, sprayed heavy around house foundations. It was powerful stuff meant to last for decades, and homeowners used it liberally. Later, it was banned for health and environmental reasons. But in the 1970s, most folks only knew it as the smell of getting the job done. Dime stores sold tiny turtles in plastic bowls to eager kids, often just a few inches long. No one warned about salmonella, and children played with them right on the kitchen table. It wasn't until 1975 that the government banned the sale of turtles under 4 inches. But before that, they were everywhere. Dish soaps and laundry detergents in the 1970s were loaded with phosphates. They made water soft, dishes shine, and suds foam high, but they also fed algae blooms downstream. Back then, few thought about what drained out with the rinse water. Only the clothes looked whiter, and sinks bubbled with satisfaction. Open municipal dumps burned nightly. Trash trucks dumped the day's load. Someone struck a match, and by evening, smoke curled into the sky. Kids sometimes biked out to watch the flames while adults shrugged it off. Recycling programs hadn't taken root yet. Burning garbage was just a city's way of managing waste. Helmets were almost unheard of for kids on bikes. If a kid showed up wearing one, he'd be teased for being overcautious. Skinned knees, chipped teeth, and a few scars were seen as part of growing up. Safety campaigns came later. Back then, the only protection was the wind in your hair. Auto shop classes taught real grease work. But waste oil and gasoline were often dumped straight outside or into floor drains. Students drained cars into open pans and learned repair by doing, not by safety manual. Today, the EPA would shut it down in seconds. But then it was all part of shop class. Families often dismogged new cars by removing early catalytic converters and smog pumps. People thought emissions equipment robbed engines of power, so it came off quick in the garage. Nobody blinked at the smoke curling out the tailpipe. It was considered smart tinkering, not tampering with environmental law. Many families proudly displayed hunting rifles on wall racks in the living room. Windows were left open, screens rattling in the summer breeze, and nobody worried about theft or liability. Guns were seen as tools, not taboos. And visitors might comment on the craftsmanship instead of raising eyebrows at the sight. Home. Fuse boxes weren't always replaced properly. If a fuse blew, plenty of folks simply stuck a penny behind it and screwed it back in. The lights came on, but so did the fire risk. It was the poor man's fix, whispered about as clever, though it left houses just one spark from disaster. Little league fields were chalked by hand, often with lime tossed straight from a bucket. Kids inhaled dust clouds as the lines were drawn, coughing and laughing without concern. Coaches might wipe their hands on their pants and go right back to the game. Protective masks and safety gear were unheard of. Hitchhiking wasn't just for strangers. It crept into carpools, especially during gas shortages. If someone was walking the same direction, a neighbor pulled over and said, "Hop in." It wasn't seen as risky or unusual. Sharing rides was simply practical, whether it was friends, neighbors, or complete strangers catching a lift. Drugstores still sold glass thermometers filled with mercury and reusable glass syringes. Parents bought them, sterilized them at home, and kept them for years. It was just part of the family medicine cabinet today. The idea of mercury in a child's mouth or a home, stock of syringes would bring immediate concern. City fireworks shows were often little more than volunteers lighting fuses in a parking lot. They used coffee cans for spent shells and a rope line for safety. Spectators sat on blankets just yards away, flinching at the booms. Permits, professionals, and barricades came later. In the 70s, it was all homemade spectacle. Farm kids, as young as 12 or 13, commonly drove tractors and wagons on public roads during harvest. A wave from a passing sheriff was enough approval. No escort vehicles, no flashing lights, just a boy or girl pulling grain at a crawl, proudly part of the family's work. Today it'd draw tickets and questions, science class sometimes included. Backyard-style rocket launches using baking soda and vinegar, or even sturdier metal launch rods for serious projects. Goggles and safety gear weren't part of the plan. Teachers clapped as students lit fuses or flipped switches. Thrilled to see something fly, sky-high, today. The risk assessments alone would cancel the lesson. Backyard tire swings hung from frayed ropes on sturdy old trees. Hard-packed dirt sat below, not foam mats. Kids doubled up, spinning and crashing into one another, laughing through the bruises. Parents watched from the porch or didn't watch at all. The rough edges of childhood were considered part of the fun. Dropping off film meant the camera clerk opened your envelope and flipped through the prints, often commenting, "Nice vacation," or "That's a good shot of the kids." Privacy wasn't part of the deal. Strangers handled every photo from beach trips to birthday parties. It was accepted, even expected in the age before digital. Steering wheel spinners. Those one-handed knobs bolted onto the rim were everywhere on family cars. Folks loved how they made tight turns effortless, especially backing into driveways, and you could buy one at the gas station. They could jam or spin wildly if mishandled, but liability wasn't the worry then. Convenience and that slick, confident feel were. Many county roads, especially rural ones, wound along cliffs and sharp curves without a guardrail in sight. A simple yellow warning sign was considered enough. Drivers knew to take it slow, but accidents were common. The lack of barriers seems shocking now, yet it was just part of country driving. Shop class in schools sometimes involved casting molten aluminum into sand molds. Students in sneakers and t-shirts poured liquid metal, sparks flying with little more than a teacher's nod of caution. Protective shields, gloves, or goggles weren't required. Kids learned real-world skills, though at risks today's safety codes would never allow. Teenagers interested in science could order chemistry glassware by mail flasks, burners, condensers, no questions asked. It was marketed as educational for school projects or science fairs. Parents rarely hesitated, even though it meant kids could experiment with volatile chemicals at home. That kind of hands-off trust feels almost unbelievable in today's regulatory climate. Traveling. Vendors drove vans through neighborhoods, sharpening knives and scissors right at the curb. Housewives passed out their kitchen blades, chatting while sparks flew from the grinder. Payment was small cash, no paperwork, no scheduling. It was a service that faded fast. But in the 70s, it was a routine sight on quiet streets. Neighborhood dogs roamed freely, following kids to school in the morning, chasing bikes in the afternoon, or sleeping near the ball field. Collars and leashes were optional. Neighbors knew every dog by name. Strays blended in. It was a carefree time before leash laws and liability worries made free-roaming pets rare. On cold nights, many homes turned to kerosene heaters, even in poorly ventilated rooms. Windows barely cracked. The smell hung in the air, but it took the chill off. Parents warned kids not to touch the hot grates, and that was about it. Today, fire marshals and safety inspectors would recoil at the risk. Cigarette vending machines stood in restaurants, motels and bowling alleys glowing with neon logos. A kid with a handful of quarters could pull the lever and get a fresh pack. No questions asked. Nobody checked IDs or thought twice. By the 80s, they were getting pushed out. But in the 70s, they blended right into everyday life. Asbestos was everywhere. Ceiling tiles, floor tiles, pipe wrap, even stage curtains in schools and auditoriums. Nobody gave a second thought to the fibers floating in the air. Custodians swept up the dust with bare hands. An entire generation spent their school years surrounded by the stuff with not a single warning label or hazard sign in sight. A phone book landed on every doorstep, big as a brick, with names, addresses, and numbers of everyone in town printed in black and white. Privacy wasn't part of the conversation. It was considered a public service. If you wanted to call a stranger or drop by, you flipped the pages and there they were, listed right there. The 3-martini lunch was more than a joke. It was a business ritual. Executives lingered over steaks and cocktails for hours, closing deals with a handshake instead of a contract. By the time the check came, the afternoon was gone. Today, it would raise eyebrows and HR flags. But back then, it was just considered good networking. Roadside fireworks stands popped up every summer, stocked with bottle rockets, cherry bombs, and strings of firecrackers. Kids wandered up with a couple of bucks from mowing lawns and walked away with bags of explosives. Sellers rarely asked an age, just smiled and made change. Neighborhoods lit up at night with bangs and sparks on every inch block. Sneaking friends into drive-ins in the trunk was half the fun. Teens folded themselves into cramped spaces, whispering not to cough or laugh while the car rolled past the ticket booth. Attendants knew it happened and mostly shrugged. Once inside, the trunk popped open and out spilled a crowd ready for soda, popcorn, and the double feature.